We still haven't unlocked the mystery of the 3 pounds of matter that sits between our ears.
Tuesday, President Obama announced a $100 million investment in brain research. Understanding the brain, he said, could lead to cures for Parkinson's and epilepsy, even post-traumatic stress disorder or Alzheimer's. But there's a long distance from here to there. And to discuss it, we're joined by Dr. Zachary Litvak, a neurosurgeon and professor at George Washington University.
Hi, Brooke.
Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
So you also, in addition to being a neurosurgeon, as you were just describing, you've kind of done some of this brain mapping work.
Yeah.
So I wonder, when you heard about this big research grant, what your hopes or concerns or thoughts were?
Mostly hope, not too many concerns. I think that a lot of people came away from today's announcement saying, okay, well, what did the president really say? He just said, we're going to give a bunch of money towards mapping the brain, but what does that really mean? There weren't any timelines, there weren't any concrete goals. But just like with the Human Genome Project, when it started, if you applied the techniques we had at the time, it would have taken over 100 years to map the whole thing. And yet we finished it in about 10 years because of advances in technology that were spurred by that goal of mapping the genome.
Is there a checklist of questions that we're trying to answer, or do we just not even know enough to know what questions we're supposed to be asking?
I don't know if there's a checklist, but I think fundamentally this is an initiative where there is an underlying drive of, okay, at the very end of this, we want to understand how the brain creates consciousness. And I'm really excited to see the technologies that fall out from this. So if you think back to the beginning of the Apollo missions, right? And we're going to put a man on the moon. And if you had sat somebody down in a studio like this and said, well, how are we going to do that? Where do you start? It would be very overwhelming for one person to say, okay, here's the checklist of everything that we need to do to get somebody to the moon, right? And that checklist probably would not have included Velcro, for example, right? So that what I'm trying to say is that as we progress, there are going to be these serendipitous discoveries along the way that either directly apply to the goal at hand or don't necessarily apply to this goal of understanding the mind, but have other important applications that affect people on a day-to-day basis.
You mentioned the lack of a concrete plan.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of what that first step should be?
It's a combination of a couple of things. I think that we need to do a better job of integrating researchers and research projects that are already underway. You know, we're also going to need to significantly improve, and we are improving, the resolution of our ability to image the brain non-invasively. So, you know, in order to do this project, we can't just cut up a brain. And then the last thing is that we have ways of measuring electrical activities at the single neuron level, and we have ways of measuring electrical activity of larger areas of the brain, but there's a big gap in between where we're going to need to figure out ways to translate the technology of recording from a single neuron to recording the activity of many hundreds of thousands of neurons in a given area.
And is that, we need a special machine that does that? Do we need a new way of interpreting data we already have? How do we do that?
You know, if I had the answer to that, I probably would have a fair share of that $100 million and maybe a Nobel in a few years.
Dr. Litvak, thanks a lot.
Brooke, thank you.